the big story of the day, obviously, is these attacks in Manchester, England, left 22 people dead. The death toll may rise because there's a lot of people gravely injured. And ISIS taking responsibility. We don't know whether this was a direct plot or whether this is a lone wolf and they're coattailing on it, but it's really almost irrelevant. Or is it? Let's find out. Former FBI Special Agent Bobby Chacon. Bobby, how are you?
Morning, Doug. Morning, Leanne.
Morning.
Thank you for being with us, Bobby. Always appreciate it.
Sure.
So let's start with that question. Does it matter tactically whether this was directly planned and funded by ISIS or a lone wolf inspired by ISIS?
Well, taking that in order, obviously, number one, it doesn't matter to the victims or their families. Number two, it really doesn't matter much to the first responder level community that's trying to stop these, attacks because the tactics are similar no matter what. And I actually stopped using the term lone wolf shortly after San Bernardino because ISIS has leveraged the power of the internet to start using an army of robots out there that just gets radicalized online, gets some instruction, may have, the very cursory contact with somebody online claiming to be from ISIS. And then they put out the edict that all you have to do is claim allegiance to ISIS and al-Baghdadi or the leader of ISIS, and then you'll be welcomed as a martyr no matter what you do. You'll be welcomed as one of our soldiers, and in the afterlife you'll ascend as one of our martyrs. So with that kind of paradigm set up, they've basically recruited infinite number of people in the world via the internet to be soldiers. So, what does it really matter, if you call them a lone wolf? I don't particularly think there are any lone wolves anymore because with the internet, with the radicalization process that takes place there, these people are ISIS. And like I said, if you talk to any of those families this morning or any of those victims, do you think it matters an inch to them?
Yeah, and because of the tactics, and because of the low-tech tactics being employed here, it's not like you require operational command structure to funnel money. I mean, there are some attacks that have required financing, but when somebody's just getting in a truck and driving it through the streets of Nice, France, it doesn't require a whole bunch of funding. By the way, this just reported, CBS News reporting that the murderer has been identified as a 23-year-old named Salman Abidi, and he was known to British authorities prior to the attack. That's all we know at this point, but we do have a name now of the murderer, for what that's worth, the loser, to use President.
Yeah.
What do you think of President Trump's statement? I don't know if you heard it this morning. Let me play this for you, because I thought it was kind of interesting.
Enjoying their lives murdered by evil losers in life. I won't call them monsters, because they would like that term. They would think that's a great name. I will call them, from now on, losers, because that's what they are. They're losers.
Now, again, this may just be semantics and it doesn't really matter, but in an odd way, I think that there's some wisdom in this, because the terrorists want to be scary. They want to frighten, and monsters frighten, whereas losers are losers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in either way. I think it's refreshing to have a voice, a leader, a world leader on the stage that's kind of confronting them face to face. We're not coddling them with our language anymore, because, quite frankly, in that world, words mean something. Words matter, and they only respect strength, and they only respect force, and so particularly an opposing force. And so I thought some of the words the president used on his recent trip over there, and to the world leaders, saying, hey, look, you guys have to get in this fight with us. You have to get in this fight. And then to take on and to tell them that they're going to be condemned for all time, that their souls will be condemned. I think all that is refreshing, and I think it's a new approach that I think is needed, because certainly, the old approach, wasn't working that well to begin with. So, I think it's good. I think that these guys are bullies. They're And they have to be pushed back on face to face, nose to nose. And I think this is the rhetoric counts, and I think it's a new approach, and we'll see how it goes.
Well, we're obviously not going to win this just with rhetoric. We need to continue to investigate, and we know what the challenges are here, that there are literally thousands and thousands of names that show up as people of interest, or certainly people who would raise an eyebrow, And you can't put everybody under surveillance. It takes a lot of resources in order to keep a person under surveillance 24 hours a day.
Well, that's exactly right. And that's why so often, like today, like what you just announced, is that we find the person who does this, and then we realize, oh, he was known to British authorities, or he was on this list or that list. Because quite frankly, terrorism is really one of those things where if someone's engaging in certain rhetoric online or certain things, oftentimes they haven't broken a real law or any law up until the time they commit the terrorist act. It's like the first real thing you can put them in jail for, but it's too late because they're a suicide bomber and they just kill 20 people.
What does that mean exactly when they've been known to authorities? What does that mean? Did they do something that the police couldn't arrest them for? What do they know about them?
Well, I mean, I think it's different in each case, but a lot of times it means that, they visited certain websites. We have what's called tripwires on the internet, right? So we know certain websites that are used either overtly or covertly to facilitate communications with these people. Now, getting, thousands of people visit these websites every day. And so a lot of times, the collection programs will collect people that, visit some of these websites. Now, some of it, like I said, either it's barely a crime or it's a crime that, they don't enforce because you can't, you'd be incarcerating, massive amounts of people who are just kind of monitoring certain websites and stuff. So I think that, it all depends on the level. And I think it's a little different in each case. We'll see in this case, he was known by British authorities. It's a shame that we've had one or two cases where, not only were they known, but they were released or they were taken into custody and released and they could have been held longer or something. So it all depends on each case. But because the monitoring is so heavy nowadays and because the internet is monitored so heavily, a lot of times they do come up on some kind of list. That's not to say that they should have been arrested or even could have been arrested. It's just, we have to see to what level. And if, in fact, he was on, the contact with authorities previously was such that they should have been held, then that has to be examined, and that's a mistake. But it's not automatically a, ball drop just because they were on some radar somewhere, but, came up short of actually being prosecuted.
We're talking about Bobby Chacon, former FBI special agent at Bobby Chacon FBI. Bobby, one of the other stories that we're doing today is that Homeland Security announced that 700,000 people overstayed their visas last year alone in the United States. And that included people who overstayed by a day, but 600,000 of them and change actually vanished into America. We have no idea where they are. And now the overwhelming majority of those people are not obviously terrorists, but we don't know. We don't know. We have no idea. How does somebody, Leon was asking me, and I couldn't answer the question, how does somebody who comes in from, let's say, Tunisia, they come in on a visa and they vanish into America? How do they live? How do they move about the country? How do they get money and put it in the bank and drive cars, et cetera, et cetera? How does that happen?
Well, I mean, the first thing they do is probably research sanctuary cities, and they find a nice sanctuary city to go live in, or come to a state like California that will, sometimes provide driver's licenses to people without any documentation, right? So this is the whittling away of the system where we don't call anybody illegal alien anymore. Now we call them undocumented citizens. Right. Well, they're not a citizen.
We just call them immigrants, as if there's no distinction.
Right. There's no distinction. My four grandparents came here as legal immigrants from Europe, and I see it as a big distinction. I see it, somewhat insultingly to my lineage that distinction is now being erased. But the system is surprisingly lax. And I understand the nobility and someone having a good heart and saying, we can't, these people are this or that. But, you're talking to someone like me whose job it was to stop terrorism, and it just makes our world so much more difficult. And we're the first ones also that get accused of dropping the ball when something does happen, and yet constantly we're faced with you're cold-hearted or you're whatever because you want to maybe send some of these people back or maybe tighten up the system a little bit so that these people can't get through. Or can't overstay. So, you have there's a balancing act that's supposed to take place, and it's way out of balance right now. It's way in favor of the people who want to come here without documentation and stay here illegally, and that just makes our job that much harder.
Now, is there a way that we could track visa overstays? In other words, you come in with a visa, and obviously we've got record of when you entered the country, and we have a record that you never left the country because there's no digital footprint of you ever leaving when you were supposed to leave. But once that happens, how would you go about tracking down somebody who overstayed a visa?
Well, and that's the joke of it is on your I-94 or whatever, on your visa paperwork, when you come in, you're supposed to list an address, right? So say he comes in on a student visa, goes to UCLA and puts down a dorm address. He could have, and then a year later, his visa expires or whenever. And, first of all, what'd you say, 600,000 of them, right, last year?
Right.
I mean, we don't have the manpower to go out and knock on 600,000 doors and say, you've overstayed your visa, come with us. We don't have the manpower or the resources to house them because now they're going to be entitled to a hearing before an immigration judge. And so now we got to feed them and house them until we can get them in front of an immigration judge. And then we've got to pay for them to get back. I mean, it's, if you think about it, if you handle it that way, instead of tightening it up at the beginning, at the entry, it's going to be so much harder. We just simply don't have the resources. 600,000 people. That would take teams of agents knocking on doors. I mean, it's, what they've done is they've set up, this is almost an Alinsky tactic. They've set up a system that overloads the system so that they've used a tactic that overloads the system so that we can't address it.
Now, there's no is there any kind of a digital way if there was a chip implanted, a biometric plant on the ID cards that are used for people to come into the country? But I guess
or the person,
if you come into the country and you're going to overstay your visa and you're intent on staying, you throw it away and you get a fake ID, and then who cares?
Exactly, and that's the refugee issue too. I mean, look, I'm as sympathetic as anything to women and children refugees who've been displaced and stuff. But we all know that 90% of these refugees are men between the ages of 18 and 34. But the problem with the refugee system and like the one you just hit on is once they're here, they're here. Once they're in, it's virtually impossible to find them and get rid of them all. So that's the key of the key is tightening up the entry, and that's where your real controls come in. It's not once they're here and tracking them down. That's a virtual impossibility in a free society like we have.
I mean, just to put
there's a black market on these documents. They can sell them. They can get new ones. Once they're here, they're here.
Yeah, and I think just to keep this in context, we're talking about a population that would be double Pittsburgh.
Yeah, 600. Were you talking about the 600,000?
Yeah. I mean and that's just remember that's just 2016.
Yeah, that's 1 year. Can you imagine the resources the government would have to expend? How many agents, immigration agents, and DHS agents and FBI agents it would take to not only like knock on doors and round them up, but then to house them, to feed them, and to provide them hearings. Because guess what? They're going to get immigration attorneys that are here in the U.S. They're going to get these groups that represent these people, in front of it. They're going to get a lot of resources on their side.
Yeah.
And it would bog down the government. That's one of those
to make it a little more
radicals.
Make it a little more vivid. I just looked this up. That's a population of Fort Worth, Texas, or Charlotte, North Carolina. Wow. And that's just last year. We added into the United States the population of Fort Worth, Texas, or Charlotte, North Carolina, who are visa jumpers. And that's just last year. All right, listen, Bobby, as always.
That's just the jumpers.
Right. And we're not counting the people who came across the border illegally. At Bobby Chacon, FBI. Bobby, thank you so much, as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Doug. Always, thanks.